But what I am going to try to do, I think that could be helpful, because especially because some of you are new to state board roles, is to talk about, some ways that you can put these pieces together. The different knowledge that you have, how might you be able to organize it, deploy it, make the most of it, in the role as a state board member. More at the 30,000 foot level from schools compared to, say, the 1 foot level or the 500 foot level. So let me, I've got a brief set of slides I'll talk through as I do this, just to motivate the conversation, and then we'll turn it over to some others and we can have some dialogue later. But here's the idea. The idea of your state boards of education, principal development. Let's go. I'm kind of, like many of us, I'm kind of amped up because of the Olympics. There's been a lot of let's go with the Olympics. I've also been watching a lot of youth baseball this summer. And so from the dugout, it's always let's go. So I figure, why not bring the same, sort of enthusiasm to this work, which is really, really important. What I'm going to do in the next, say, 10 minutes or so is just talk to you about these three reports that, if you haven't already seen them, I think they provide a great place to kind of dive in. There are three reports that I authored within the last 10 years that speak to the topics that Paulo started to broadly introduce, and that speak to a lot of the things that you all were mentioning in your opening remarks. The report from 2015 on the left here is a piece that looks at the different policy levers that state policymakers, be they on boards or state agencies or the legislature, let's say, might be able to pull in order to improve the conditions in which principals work, try to enhance the quality of the people going into the principalship, and those sorts of things. So that's sort of the biggest of the big pictures here. And then the next two reports apply those ideas to a couple of different contexts. The one in the middle, called States as Leaders, Followers, and Partners, was basically a reflection on a couple of big Wallace Foundation initiatives. One was called the ESSA Leadership Learning Community. And that project from the Wallace Foundation looked at a series of states, some of the states in this room right now, actually, that were trying to use some of the flexibility within ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, in order to approach and sort of better engage with the principalship. So it was a big study about those efforts. And then the other big study mentioned here is the University Principal Preparation Initiative. And so that one was about redesign of principal prep programs across, again, a series of states. Some of them are represented here in the room. And what I was trying to do in this report was to extract from both of those big research agendas, what are some of the lessons that state leaders like you all can consider as you try to, like I said, enhance and improve the principalship in your states. And then the last report that's on the right here, looks at state policy and the specific initiative of local school district principal pipelines. So in school districts where they've developed a very organized and coordinated effort, often with partners like universities, to develop their own principals and improve the work that they're able to do. What can states do to support that and to augment that? If you wind the clock back, say 30 or 40 years on this topic, almost everybody thought that principals and sort of the support of principals, development of principals, it was really about what happens in local communities, right, in local school districts. And a lot of state people didn't really have a sense of what their role was in this area. And wow, like fast forward today, this has changed so much. And what these reports are trying to do is to kind of provide some ways of thinking that I think can help as state policymakers try to engage this topic, as I know you all are doing. So I'm just going to have one little nugget out of each report that I want to share, and then I'm going to pass off to the next presenters to continue the discussion. So if we first start with the levers report, these are the different levers that identified in that report, which are places where state officials can try to gain some traction to try to help improve the principalship in their states. a few things that are that I want to just mention about these levers. You all know what these are, but just some observations really. One is that it reveals, maybe this is too obvious to state, but it's worth stating. It reveals that states actually have a lot of things they can do, like a lot of areas where they can be impactful in principal development. And depending on what state you're in, some of these levers might be more locked into the kinds of authority that state boards themselves have, whereas in other states, some of these things might be more in the control of other entities like legislatures or a state professional standards board or something like that. So there is some variation across state board authority in particular across some of these levers. The other thing to note about these is that it provides a good way to think about opportunities for gaining some traction, as I said, because this is not a sequential list. Now, there is some benefit to having great state standards and sort of organizing work around standards, but really once that's in place, it doesn't necessarily matter whether a state wants to make a big initiative on licensing or valuation or recruitment. Like you can kind of dive in in any order that seems appropriate for your state based on, your comparative advantages, based on, what seems to be your most pressing need. So there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of opportunity to deploy some of these levers depending on sort of where you sit. And really, lastly, just to underscore all of this, is the importance of standards as marbling through almost all these other levers, right? And this gets to the issue of alignment, and is everyone kind of rowing the boat in the same direction, without things becoming too incoherent. And standards can really be a powerful force there. So this first report, the goal of it was to really lay out what these levers are and give some exemplar cases of how states have been using them in effective ways. Okay, so that's kind of nugget number one. The second nugget that I wanted to share comes out of the synthesis of the ELLC and the University Principal Preparation Initiative research, to make the point about how state boards can really play different roles depending on the situation, depending on the issue, right? Leaders, followers, and partners as they contribute to the networks that are so important for shaping the principalship in the state. And so just to give you an illustration of what I mean by these things, think of your role as state board members as leaders. One of the things that you are able to do that is very difficult, let's say, for local school districts or local schools to do, is to be an entity that sees across your entire state, right? You can see the urban, the suburban, the local, and all the different issues that are percolating. You know who the players are. And so one great role that boards can be is conveners, right? Pulling people together who maybe don't know each other, but maybe should know each other, right? And boards have that insight because they have to sort of ride herd over the entire enterprise across a state. So the idea of convening minds like we're convening here at this meeting, right? NASB is a convener, but state boards can also be conveners within their own states. And so that's an example of leadership. An example of being a follower is to, that important role of listening to school districts. If you track great ideas that states adopt into state policy, almost always those ideas were tried out or started at the local level, right? Someone got an idea and they tried to work with it and they got some friendly ears at the state level. And then those state folks picked up on that and decided, hey, maybe we can run with this. So, hey, local districts, show us, lead the way, tell us what you're doing and tell us what we can do to be supportive of you, right? That's a good example of the follower type role. And then, an example of the partnership role is when there are opportunities when state boards are in the room with people who are from all different varieties of perspectives within the state, maybe with state legislatures, with people from the governor's office, with people from local districts or universities. And, it could be in those moments, there are times when you need to hold the floor and kind of take charge. And there could be other times when, you need to be the one that's supporting or lending the critical questioning to someone else who's the leader. And that's kind of up to you, to figure out when those moments are. And so this second report here really surfaced some of the illustrative moments when state leaders played all these different roles. And so you can hopefully see yourself in some of these examples that are in that report. And then going to the last one, which links state policy to local principal pipelines. This is really taking the idea of the levers that were in that first report and then applying them into a very specific setting of where local districts do have some strategic approach for developing principles. And if you look across the different parts of the pipeline, I'm sure many of you have seen this diagram before or something like it. If you look at it, in almost every different stop along the way, there is potentially some influence that state policy and state boards can have, right? And hopefully what's going to happen is that influence will be for the better. It won't be for the worse, to trip up localities that have good ideas or that are moving along with some of these pipelines that they have in action. And again, this report, what it does is it takes the some illustrations of local pipelines that have been in operation, and it shows ways that states have been able to connect with them to help enhance what they're doing. And probably, and this is kind of the last point I want to make as I transition to the end, is this point at the bottom here about sustainability is really crucial, especially for state leaders to think about. There's so much that localities are asked to do, and they do a lot of it on a shoestring. And we also know that a lot of federal money is now running out, right? The sort of the emergency money from COVID and other things. And so if we're going to sustain some of these efforts like pipelines at the local level, then state leaders like yourselves can think about, all right, what contribution can I make for sustainability? And one of the points that that comes up in this report that I make about sustainability is it talks about a few different examples of sustainability. So one is the obvious one is like fiscal support, right? Providing funds for things. But equally important is this issue of political support, right? Sometimes it's really local districts need to do difficult things politically to try to improve the principalship. And if state leaders have their backs and can absorb some of that political criticism, it can make it easier for locals to do what they really need to do and maybe what they want to do, right? So if a local school district leader or superintendent can say, well, I have to do this because the state forced me, but the superintendent really wanted to do it anyways, right? Because it was a good idea. Like that helps absorb some of the criticism that would otherwise really build up at the local level. So you all have a role to play. This is an example of sustainability. And then lastly, just to provide some empirical evidence of the role of state boards. These are some data that came from the 2015 report on levers. And what I did was I was able to get from the Wallace Foundation some questionnaires that they asked to their various grantees. There was a list of 30 grantees at this point that Wallace had worked with around principal development. And one of the questions that we asked those grantees was, how important were different state entities in helping you to sustain the work that you were doing after the Wallace money ran out, right? How do who's really important? And if you look at this, state boards were actually one of the more important ones on the list, even exceeding the importance of the governor's office and the state legislature, right? So they're right up there with, the universities, the state agency, et cetera. So, this suggests to me that there is a lot of potential influence that you all can have on these matters. And, don't be afraid to like grab that leadership role and recognize when to be the leader, when to be the follower, when to be, the partner in all of this. So I'm gonna wrap up there and just say thanks very much for your attention and your interest. And I know we'll have some time for discussion, so I'm looking forward to that soon. So I'll sign off, hand the baton. In the interest of the Olympics, I'll hand the baton back to Paulo. A perfect transition, and then he can hand it to the next.
Paul, thank you so much. It's always great to hear you talk. And again, I think your reports always provide sort of very elegant guidance that's actionable and understandable.